In a small, quiet village surrounded by green hills and thick woods, life was simple and predictable. People woke up early, worked hard in the fields, ate meals together, and spent evenings sharing stories under the stars. The villagers were deeply connected to their traditions, passing them down from one generation to the next. Funerals especially were sacred events, a time for the entire community to come together and say goodbye to someone they loved. On this particular morning, the air felt heavier than usual. A kind-hearted old man who everyone respected had passed away after a long illness. He was known for his wisdom, generosity, and knack for telling fascinating tales that kept children glued to their seats. His death left a void in the village, and as people gathered near the cemetery on the edge of town, sadness hung over them like a gray cloud. The funeral procession moved slowly toward the burial site. Men carried the wooden coffin, its surface polished smooth by careful hands. Women walked behind, their heads covered with shawls, clutching handkerchiefs to wipe away tears. Children stayed close to their parents, unusually quiet, sensing the weight of the moment. It was a scene filled with grief but also respect, for the man who had touched so many lives and for the cycle of life itself. As the coffin was lowered into the freshly dug grave, an unsettling noise broke the silence. At first it sounded like distant thunder rolling across the hills. But then heads turned toward the nearby field where horses grazed peacefully. One of the animals, a large black stallion, suddenly bolted, galloping straight toward the crowd. Its hooves pounded against the earth, kicking up clouds of dust. Panic rippled through the mourners as they scrambled out of the way, shouting warnings and shielding themselves from the charging beast. The horse didn't stop. With terrifying speed, it reached the open grave and leaped right over it, landing heavily on the coffin below. The impact sent splinters flying, cracking the lid wide open. For a moment everything froze. The mourners stood frozen in shock, staring at the broken casket. Then something even more unbelievable happened. From inside the shattered coffin came a sound, a soft, heartbreaking sob. It wasn't the creak of wood or the rustle of fabric. It was unmistakably human, as if someone trapped inside was crying out for help. A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. Some people whispered prayers, clutching rosaries tightly in trembling hands. Others stepped backward, their faces pale with fear. No one dared approach the grave. How could this be possible? They had all seen the body lying still just hours before. The man was gone, lifeless, cold. Yet here was proof, undeniable and impossible, that something extraordinary was happening. One man finally found the courage to step forward. He was older, with weathered skin and steady eyes. Though his hands shook slightly, he knelt beside the coffin and carefully pried open the cracked lid. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. Inside lay the same man who had been declared dead days ago. But now his chest rose and fell faintly, and tears streamed down his cheeks. He wasn't speaking, only weeping softly, as though carrying the weight of an unimaginable burden. The news spread quickly through the village. By evening, almost everyone had heard about what happened. Some rushed to see for themselves, while others stayed home, too frightened to believe it. Priests arrived to bless the scene, sprinkling holy water and reciting prayers. Doctors examined the man, checking his pulse, listening to his heartbeat, and shaking their heads in disbelief. Neighbors huddled together, whispering theories about how this could have happened. Was it a miracle? A medical error? Or something far stranger? For the rest of the day, the village buzzed with activity. People debated endlessly, trying to make sense of the inexplicable. Meanwhile, the man remained weak and confused, unable to explain much beyond his tears. All anyone knew for sure was that a man once thought lost had somehow returned, and no one could figure out why or how. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the village, the man who had returned from the grave began to stir. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, he seemed lost, staring blankly at the faces gathered around him. Villagers watched in stunned silence, unsure whether to feel relief, fear, or awe. One elderly woman reached out hesitantly, her hand trembling as she touched his arm. "Is it really you?" she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of emotion. The man blinked slowly, as if trying to focus. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse and barely audible. I don't know where I am," he murmured. "It's dark. So dark." He trailed off, his gaze drifting toward the sky as though searching for something only he could see. Those words sent shivers down the spines of everyone present. It wasn't just confusion. It was as if he were describing another place, another world entirely. Over the next few days, the man grew stronger, though his mind remained clouded. He struggled to recall details about his life before death, but fragments of memory began to surface. He told the villagers that after he had taken his last breath, he found himself in a vast, empty void. There was no light, no sound, only an overwhelming sense of coldness that seeped into his very soul. At first he thought he was alone, but then he started hearing whispers. Faint at first, they grew louder, calling his name over and over again. "It was like they were pulling me back," he said one evening, sitting by the fire with a small group of listeners. His hands trembled as he clasped them together, trying to steady himself. The voices weren't cruel, but they weren't kind either. They just wanted me. The villagers leaned closer, hanging on every word. Some nodded solemnly while others exchanged uneasy glances. They had never heard anything like this before. Not in stories, not in prayers, not even in their worst nightmares. But there was more. The man claimed that during those endless moments in the void, he felt a presence, a powerful force that guided him. He couldn't explain what it was, only that it gave him strength when he thought all hope was lost. And then suddenly he woke up in the coffin, surrounded by chaos as the horse trampled the lid. "That horse," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "It knew. Somehow it knew I wasn't supposed to stay there." Word of his story spread far beyond the village. People from neighboring towns arrived, eager to catch a glimpse of the man who had come back from the dead. Some brought gifts, food, blankets, candles, as offerings of gratitude or curiosity. Others came seeking answers, desperate to understand how such a thing could happen. A few even hoped for miracles of their own, believing that the man might possess some divine power capable of curing illnesses or solving problems. The influx of visitors transformed the quiet village almost overnight. Streets once empty now bustled with activity. Vendors set up stalls selling food, handmade crafts, and trinkets meant to commemorate the event. Children ran between the crowds, laughing and shouting, while adults haggled over prices or shared theories about the mysterious resurrection. For some villagers, this sudden attention brought excitement and prosperity. For others, it stirred unease. Not everyone welcomed the change. Many older residents worried that the influx of outsiders would disrupt their way of life. They grumbled about strangers wandering through sacred spaces and feared that the village's traditions might be forgotten in the chaos. Worse still, strange things began happening, things that couldn't easily be explained. Crops that had been thriving just days earlier started wilting without reason. Livestock grew restless, refusing to eat or sleep. Even the weather seemed off, with unseasonable storms rolling in unexpectedly. Some villagers pointed fingers at the man, convinced that his return had upset the natural balance of the world. Whispers circulated late at night, speculating that perhaps he hadn't truly come back to life, that maybe something else had taken his place. Fearful glances followed him wherever he went, and invitations to gatherings dwindled. Though no one dared confront him directly, the tension in the air was palpable. Despite the growing suspicion, there were still those who stood by him. A young girl, barely 10 years old, became his staunchest defender. She had always admired the man for his kindness and gentle nature, often sitting at his feet as he told stories during festivals. Now she refused to believe the rumors swirling around him. "He's the same person he always was," she insisted whenever anyone criticized him. Her loyalty gave him comfort during lonely nights when doubt crept in. The man himself wrestled with guilt and confusion. He didn't ask to come back, he didn't want to cause trouble. Yet here he was, caught in the middle of a storm he couldn't control. As weeks passed, he spent more time alone, wandering the outskirts of the village where fewer people ventured. Sometimes he would sit by the field where the black stallion grazed, watching the animal with a mixture of reverence and sadness. He often wondered if the horse understood what it had done, if it remembered the day it shattered the coffin and freed him from the darkness. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, the man sat near the edge of the forest, deep in thought. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint sound of hoofbeats. He turned his head sharply, half expecting to see the stallion emerge from the shadows. But instead, he saw something else, a figure standing just beyond the tree line, cloaked in darkness. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It simply watched him, its presence both comforting and unsettling. The man stood up, his heart pounding. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. After a few moments, it vanished into the woods, leaving behind nothing but silence. Shaken but unable to explain what he had seen, the man returned to the village, his mind racing with questions. Was it real? Had he imagined it? Or was it another sign that the boundary between life and death was thinner than anyone realized? Back in the village, tensions continued to simmer. Arguments erupted at council meetings, dividing families and friends. Some believed the man should stay, while others argued that sending him away was the only way to restore peace. Caught in the middle of it all, the man knew one thing for certain: his second chance at life came with a price, one he wasn't sure he could afford to pay. As the days stretched into weeks, the tension in the village grew thicker than ever. The once close-knit community now felt fractured, with neighbors avoiding each other's eyes and conversations turning awkward at the slightest mention of the man who had returned from the grave. Some people whispered behind closed doors, their voices low and urgent as they debated what should be done. Others tried to stay neutral, caught between fear and loyalty, unsure which side to take. The council meetings became battlegrounds for these opposing views. Every evening, villagers gathered in the old wooden hall near the center of town, its walls lined with faded maps and dusty shelves. The air inside was always heavy, filled with the scent of sweat and smoke from the flickering oil lamps. Elders sat at the front, their faces stern and lined with worry, while younger members stood along the edges, shifting uncomfortably as arguments grew louder. One group insisted that the man's return was a blessing, a sign from above meant to remind them of hope and resilience. They pointed to his kindness before his death, recalling how he had helped farmers during harvest season or comforted grieving families after losses. "He hasn't changed," one elderly woman argued passionately, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "Why are we treating him like an outsider? He's still one of us." But others weren't convinced. A farmer with calloused hands and a deep frown spoke up next, his voice gruff but steady. "It's not about who he was," he said, shaking his head. "It's about what happened since he came back. Crops failing, animals acting strange, storms out of nowhere. None of this started until he returned." Murmurs rippled through the room, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads in disbelief. "Maybe it's not his fault," the farmer continued, "but maybe it is. Either way, something's wrong here, and we can't ignore it." For hours, the debate raged on, with no clear solution in sight. Tempers flared, voices rose, and accusations flew across the room like arrows. Just when it seemed the meeting might dissolve into chaos, a small figure stepped forward. It was the young girl who had defended the man so fiercely before. Her cheeks were flushed, and her fists were clenched tightly at her sides, but she held her ground. "Stop fighting," she shouted, her voice cutting through the noise like a sharp blade. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to her. She swallowed hard, visibly nervous, but she didn't back down. "You're all forgetting who we are," she continued, her voice softer now but still strong. "We're a family. We look out for each other no matter what. Do you really think he wants any of this? He didn't ask to come back. He didn't ask for any of you to fight over him." Her words hung in the air, raw and honest. For a moment, no one moved. Then slowly, someone near the back nodded, followed by another, and another. The tension began to ease, replaced by a shared sense of shame. The girl was right. They had let fear divide them, clouding their judgment and forgetting the values they claimed to hold dear. Still, the question remained. What would they do about the man? Sending him away felt cruel, but keeping him risked further unrest. Finally, an older man, the same one who had first opened the coffin, spoke up. His voice was calm but firm, carrying the weight of years spent making difficult decisions. "Let's give him a choice," he suggested. "If he stays, we'll stand by him, no matter what happens. But if he feels leaving would be better for everyone, we won't stop him." The proposal was met with hesitant nods. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was fair, and it gave the man agency over his own fate. The council disbanded for the night, leaving the decision in his hands. When the man heard about the council's offer, he sat quietly for a long time, staring into the fire that crackled softly in the hearth of his small cottage. The young girl sat beside him, her presence offering silent support. Outside, the wind howled against the shutters, rattling them gently as though trying to join the conversation. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never did, but I can see how much pain I've caused already. Maybe it's best if I go." The girl's face fell, but she didn't argue. Instead, she reached out and took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "Where will you go?" she asked, her voice trembling. He shook his head. "I don't know. Somewhere far enough that I won't bring trouble, but close enough that I can visit sometimes. This place, it's home, and I'd miss it too much to leave forever." The next morning, the man packed a few belongings into a worn leather satchel. Word spread quickly through the village, and by the time he stepped outside, a small crowd had gathered to see him off. There were no angry shouts or accusing stares, only quiet sadness. Some offered hugs, others pressed small gifts into his hands, a loaf of bread, a warm scarf, a carved wooden figurine. The girl stood nearby, tears streaming down her face, clutching a bundle of wildflowers she had picked earlier. As he prepared to leave, the man turned to address the villagers. His voice was steady, though emotion shimmered in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything. I'll never forget what this place means to me, or what all of you mean to me." Then, without another word, he began walking down the dirt path that led out of the village, his footsteps crunching softly against the gravel. The villagers watched until he disappeared over the hill, the black stallion trailing silently behind him. No one knew where they were headed, but somehow it felt fitting that the horse had chosen to follow him once again. As the last traces of his figure vanished from sight, the wind picked up, carrying with it the faint sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance. Back in the village, life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be. The strange occurrences gradually subsided, and the fields began to recover. Yet the memory of the man lingered, woven into the fabric of daily life. Stories of his resurrection became part of the village's lore, told around campfires and passed down to children wide-eyed with wonder. And every so often, when the wind swept through the hills, people swore they could hear the echo of those hoofbeats, a reminder of the day when the impossible became possible, and hope found a way to triumph over despair. The man walked for days, his path winding through forests, across rivers, and over hills that stretched endlessly before him. The black stallion stayed by his side, its presence both comforting and mysterious. They traveled in silence, the rhythmic sound of hooves against the earth keeping them company as they moved farther away from the village. Though the man carried little with him, a satchel of food, a warm blanket, and a few mementos from home, he felt lighter than he had in years. For the first time since his return, he wasn't burdened by the weight of other people's fears or expectations. Each morning, he woke with the sunrise, feeling the crisp air fill his lungs. He'd sit for a while, watching the stallion graze, nearby, its dark coat glistening in the early light. Sometimes he wondered if the horse truly understood what it had done, how it had shattered the coffin and pulled him back from the brink of oblivion. "Why did you do it?" he asked one day, his voice soft but filled with curiosity. The stallion lifted its head, ears twitching as if listening, then went back to nibbling at the grass. It didn't answer, of course, but the man smiled anyway. Somehow he knew the horse had played a part in his journey, even if neither of them fully understood why. As they ventured deeper into unfamiliar territory, the man began to notice subtle changes in the landscape. The trees grew taller, their branches twisting skyward like ancient guardians. Streams sparkled under the sunlight, their waters clear and cool. Birds sang melodies he hadn't heard before, and the air smelled sweeter, fresher. It was as though nature itself welcomed him, offering solace after everything he'd been through. But it wasn't just the scenery that changed. It was him. With each step, the man felt more connected to the world around him. Memories of the void, the cold, dark emptiness he had described to the villagers, still lingered in the corners of his mind. But they no longer haunted him. Instead, they reminded him of how precious life was, how fragile and fleeting. He started paying attention to small details, the way leaves rustled in the breeze, the warmth of the sun on his skin, the quiet hum of insects buzzing in the tall grass. These moments grounded him, anchoring him to the present instead of letting his thoughts drift back to the past, or worse, to the unknown future. One afternoon, as they approached a dense thicket, the stallion suddenly stopped. Its ears flattened against its head, and it pawed at the ground nervously. The man frowned, scanning the area ahead. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just trees, shadows, and patches of sunlight filtering through the canopy above. But then, movement caught his eye. A figure emerged from the woods, cloaked in tattered robes that seemed to blend with the surroundings. The person's face was hidden beneath a hood, making it impossible to tell whether they were young or old, male or female. "Who are you?" the man called out, his voice steady despite the unease creeping up his spine. The figure didn't respond immediately. Instead, it tilted its head slightly, studying him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. Finally, it spoke. Its voice, low and raspy, like dry leaves scraping against stone. "You carry questions," it said, not bothering to introduce itself. "Questions about the darkness, about the whispers, about the horse." The man froze, his heart pounding. How could this stranger know? He hadn't told anyone except the villagers, and even then only a handful of people had heard his story. Yet here was someone who seemed to understand exactly what he had experienced. "How do you know about that?" he asked, taking a cautious step forward. The stallion snorted behind him, clearly uneasy. The figure chuckled softly, a sound that sent shivers down the man's spine. "I know many things," it replied cryptically, "but answers aren't free. Are you willing to pay the price?" "What price?" the man demanded, his voice sharper now. He didn't trust this stranger, but he couldn't ignore the pull of curiosity either. Whatever secrets this person held might finally explain why he had returned, and why the horse had chosen him. The figure stepped closer, lowering its hood, just enough to reveal piercing eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. "Your memories," it said simply. "Not all of them, but enough to show you the truth. In exchange, you must promise never to seek me out again. Once I'm gone for good." The man hesitated, torn between fear and desperation. Giving up pieces of his memory felt like losing a part of himself, yet the thought of finally understanding what had happened was too tempting to resist. After a long pause, he nodded. "I'll do it," he said firmly. "Show me." The figure raised a hand, and before the man could react, a sharp pain shot through his temples. Images flooded his mind, flashes of the void, the whispers growing louder, the horse galloping toward him as if guided by some unseen force. He saw himself lying in the coffin, trapped between worlds, until the lid cracked open and light poured, and then came fragments of his life before death. Moments of joy, sorrow, love, loss, all blending together in a kaleidoscope of emotions. When the vision ended, the man stumbled backward, gasping for air. His head throbbed and tears streamed down his face as he processed what he had seen. The figure stood silently, waiting. Finally, it spoke again. "Now you know," it said. "The horse chose you because your story isn't finished. But remember, this. Balance must be maintained. Life and death are two sides of the same coin. Interfering with one affects the other." Before the man could ask anything else, the figure turned and disappeared into the woods, leaving him alone with the stallion. For a long time he sat there, trying to make sense of what he had learned. The answers weren't complete. They left. More questions than clarity, but they gave him a sense of purpose. Whatever lay ahead, he realized, wasn't just about him. It was about finding harmony, respecting the delicate thread that connected all living things. With renewed determination, the man rose to his feet. He patted the stallion's neck, grateful for its unwavering companionship. Together they continued their journey, leaving the forest behind and stepping into the unknown. Though challenges awaited, he faced them with courage, knowing that every step brought him closer to understanding not just himself but the world around him. The man and the stallion continued their journey, moving steadily through landscapes that seemed to shift like dreams. Each day brought new sights: rolling meadows bathed in golden sunlight, rocky cliffs overlooking endless oceans, and quiet valleys where streams murmured secrets to the wind. The farther they traveled, the more the man felt a strange sense of purpose growing within him. It wasn't loud or overwhelming. It was subtle, like the first rays of dawn breaking through the night. He didn't fully understand it yet, but he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about running away from the village or escaping the fears of others. This was about finding something deeper, something that connected him to the world in ways he couldn't explain. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the man decided to rest near a small lake surrounded by tall reeds. The water was so still it mirrored the clouds above, creating an illusion of two skies, one real, one reflected. He knelt by the edge, cupping his hands to drink. The cool liquid refreshed him, washing away the dust of the road, but it also stirred something inside, a memory, faint and fleeting, of another time when water had been a source of comfort. As he sat there staring at his reflection, the stallion nudged him gently with its nose. Startled, the man turned to look at the horse, meeting its deep, intelligent eyes. "What is it?" he asked softly, though he didn't expect an answer. But the horse seemed insistent, pawing at the ground and tossing its head toward the forest beyond the lake. The man frowned, glancing at the trees. They loomed dark and silent, their branches swaying slightly in the breeze. Something about them felt different. Not dangerous exactly, but alive in a way that made his skin tingle. Curiosity got the better of him. Picking up his satchel, he followed the horse into the woods, weaving between ancient trunks covered in moss. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine needles. Every step felt deliberate, as if the forest itself were guiding them. After a while, they reached a clearing where moonlight filtered through gaps in the canopy, illuminating a circle of smooth stones arranged in the center. At first glance, it looked natural, just rocks scattered by chance, but the longer the man stared, the more intentional it seemed. Someone had placed them there long ago. In the middle of the circle stood an old woman, her figure hunched but commanding. She wore a cloak made of woven leaves and carried a staff carved with intricate patterns. Her hair was silver, cascading down her back like a waterfall frozen in time. When she spoke, her voice was soft, yet powerful, resonating like a melody played on distant strings. "You've come far," she said, not bothering to ask who he was or why he was there. "But your journey has only begun." The man blinked, caught off guard. "Do you know me?" he asked cautiously, unsure whether to trust her. She chuckled, the sound warm and inviting. "I know many things," she replied, echoing the mysterious figure from the thicket. "But knowledge isn't always given freely. Tell me, traveler, what do you seek?" The question caught him off guard. For weeks, he had been wandering without a clear destination, driven by instinct rather than intent. Now, Faced with such a direct inquiry, he found himself struggling to put his thoughts into words. I'm not sure," he admitted after a pause. "At first I thought I was running. From fear, from doubt, from everything that tied me to the life I left behind. But now," he trailed off, looking at the horse, then back at the woman. "Now, I think I'm searching for balance, for understanding, for a way to make sense of what happened and maybe even help others find peace." The old woman nodded slowly, as if his answer confirmed something she already knew. "Balance is a fragile thing," she said, tapping her staff against the ground. A faint hum filled the air, vibrating through the stones beneath their feet. "It exists everywhere, in nature, in people, in life itself. When disrupted, it seeks restoration. That is why you are here." "What do you mean?" the man asked, leaning forward slightly. His heart raced, eager to unravel the mystery. "You were called back for a reason," she explained, her gaze steady. "Not because you deserve punishment or reward, but because the world needed someone to bridge the gap between worlds. Death is not an end, nor is life a beginning. They are threads in the same tapestry, intertwined forever. Your role is to remind others of this truth, not through words, but through actions." The man furrowed his brow, trying to grasp her meaning. "How can I do that? I'm just me, an ordinary person." She smiled, her expression kind but firm. "Ordinary people often hold extraordinary power. Trust yourself, trust the horse, and most importantly, trust the path ahead, even when it seems unclear." With those cryptic words, she stepped back into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as she had appeared. The man called out to her, but his voice echoed uselessly in the empty clearing. All that remained was the circle of stones and the lingering sensation that he had just received both a gift and a challenge. That night, as he lay beside the fire, the man replayed the encounter in his mind. The old woman's words haunted him, not because they were frightening, but because they felt true. He thought about the whispers in the void, the horse's determination, and the villagers' reactions. Everything pointed to one undeniable fact. His second chance wasn't just for him, it was for everyone. The next morning, he woke with a renewed sense of clarity. Though the road ahead was uncertain, he no longer feared it. With the stallion by his side, he set off once again, ready to embrace whatever lay in store. Little did he know the greatest challenges and revelations were still waiting for him. The man and the stallion pressed on, their journey taking them through places that felt both familiar and strange. Each new landscape seemed to whisper secrets, as if the earth itself was trying to guide them toward something greater. The man no longer questioned why he was traveling or what lay ahead. Instead, he focused on the present, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the rhythmic sound of the horse's hooves, the way sunlight danced through the trees. He had learned to trust the path, even when it twisted in unexpected directions. One afternoon, they stumbled upon a village nestled in a valley surrounded by towering mountains. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, and the faint hum of conversation drifted through the air. It was smaller than the man's hometown, but radiated warmth and life. As they approached, villagers paused their work to stare curiously at the stranger and his horse. Some greeted him with cautious smiles, while others kept their distance, whispering among themselves. A boy no older than 10 broke away from the crowd and ran up to the man. His face lit up with excitement as he pointed toward the stallion. "Is this your horse?" he asked, his voice filled with awe. The man nodded, patting the animal's neck affectionately. "Yes," he replied with a small smile. "He's been my companion for a long time." The boy reached out tentatively, brushing his fingers against the horse's velvety nose. "He's beautiful," he said softly. Then, after a moment, he added, "Why are you here?" The question caught the man off guard. For a brief second, he considered brushing it aside with a vague answer, but something about the boy's earnest expression stopped him. "I'm not sure yet," he admitted honestly. but I think I'll know when the time comes." The boy grinned, satisfied with the response, and scampered back to join his friends. Meanwhile, an elderly woman approached the man, her steps slow but steady. She introduced herself as the village healer and invited him to stay for dinner. Grateful for the hospitality, he accepted, following her to a cozy cottage at the edge of the village. That evening, seated around a wooden table laden with hearty stew and freshly baked bread, the man found himself sharing stories with the villagers. At first he spoke cautiously, avoiding details that might raise eyebrows or stir fear, but as the meal progressed, he opened up more, recounting fragments of his experience: the void, the whispers, the horse's intervention. To his surprise, no one reacted with disbelief or alarm. Instead, they listened intently, their faces reflecting a mix of wonder and understanding. When he finished speaking, the room fell silent for a moment. Then the healer leaned forward, her eyes sharp and knowing. "You've been chosen," she said simply, as if stating a fact rather than offering an opinion. "Chosen for what?" the man asked, though deep down he suspected the answer. "For healing," she replied. "Not just bodies, but hearts and minds. People carry burdens they don't know how to release. You can help them find peace." Her words resonated deeply, stirring emotions he hadn't fully acknowledged until now. Since leaving his village, he had encountered countless individuals, some kind, some wary, but each interaction had left an imprint on him. Perhaps this was part of his purpose: to listen, to connect, to remind others that they weren't alone. The next morning, the man thanked the villagers for their kindness and prepared to leave. As he mounted the stallion, the boy from the day before came running up, clutching a small pouch in his hands. "Here," he said, thrusting it toward the man. Inside were dried herbs wrapped carefully in cloth. "My grandmother says these will protect you." Touched by the gesture, the man accepted the gift with gratitude. "Tell her thank you," he said, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. With a final wave, he and the horse set off once again, leaving the village behind. Their travels took them to other towns and villages, each stop revealing new challenges and opportunities. In one place, they met a farmer whose crops had failed due to drought. Desperate and hopeless, the man blamed himself for angering the spirits of the land. The traveler spent hours talking to him, sharing stories of resilience and reminding him that nature often moved in cycles beyond human control. By the time they parted ways, the farmer's despair had softened into determination. In another village, they encountered a grieving mother who refused to let go of her child's memory. The loss consumed her, leaving little room for joy or connection with those still alive. The man sat with her for days, listening patiently as she poured out her pain. Slowly, she began to see that honoring her child's life didn't mean clinging to sorrow. It meant living fully in their honor. Through these encounters, the man realized that the old healer had been right. His role wasn't to fix problems or provide answers. It was to be present, to offer compassion and understanding. And somehow, the stallion always seemed to know where they needed to go next, leading them unerringly to those who needed help most. Yet, despite the progress he made, doubts lingered. Was he truly making a difference, or was he merely delaying the inevitable? These questions gnawed at him during quiet moments, especially at night when the stars stretched endlessly above. But whenever uncertainty threatened to overwhelm him, the horse would nudge him gently as if to say, "Keep going." And so he did. Together they forged ahead, guided by faith and the belief that every step mattered, even if the destination remained unclear. As the weeks turned into months, the man and the stallion became a familiar sight in the regions they passed through. Word of their arrival often spread quickly, carried by travelers or merchants who had encountered them along dusty roads. People began to call him the Wanderer, though few knew his real story. To some, he was a healer, to others, a storyteller or a guide. What united everyone, however, was the sense that he brought something intangible: a calmness, a reassurance, a spark of hope. In one village perched on the edge of a vast desert, the Wanderer faced one of his greatest challenges yet. The place was shadowed by grief, its streets eerily quiet despite the midday sun. When he asked what troubled the villagers, an old man with weathered hands explained that a terrible sickness had swept through the community, claiming many lives. Those who survived were left hollow, unable to find joy or purpose in anything. The wanderer listened carefully, his heart heavy with empathy. He didn't pretend to have all the answers, but he offered what he could: time, presence, and patience. For days he moved among the villagers, sitting with those who needed to talk and staying silent when words felt unnecessary. Sometimes, he simply walked alongside someone as they went about their chores, sharing the weight of their burden without saying a word. One evening, as the sky blazed with fiery hues, the villagers gathered around a large bonfire at the center of the square. Someone suggested telling stories, not just sad ones, but tales of laughter, love, and triumph. The idea took hold, and soon voices rose in unison, recounting memories of happier times. The wanderer joined in too, sharing stories from his own life before death and after his return. His words painted vivid pictures of resilience and connection, leaving the crowd spellbound. By the end of the night, there were tears. But they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of release, of healing, of remembering that life still held beauty even in the face of loss. As the fire burned low, the villagers thanked the wanderer, their gratitude evident in their smiles and warm embraces. Though he hadn't cured the illness or reversed the pain, he had reminded them that they were stronger together, and that sometimes surviving itself was a victory worth celebrating. But not every stop was so peaceful. In another town nestled between jagged cliffs, the wanderer found himself caught in the middle of conflict. Two families had been feuding for years over land rights, their bitterness poisoning relationships throughout the community. Tempers flared easily and mistrust ran deep. When the wanderer arrived, both sides eyed him suspiciously, unsure whether he was friend or foe. Rather than pick a side, he chose to listen, to truly hear each family's grievances and fears. He spent hours sitting with them separately, letting them vent their frustrations and share their hopes for the future. Slowly, he began to see patterns, misunderstandings that had festered into resentment, wounds that refused to heal because no one had ever acknowledged them. With permission from both families, he organized a meeting under an ancient oak tree at the edge of the disputed land. At first, the atmosphere was tense, with accusations flying back and forth. But the wanderer remained calm, his steady voice cutting through the anger like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "You've forgotten something important," he said gently. "This land doesn't belong to either of you. It belongs to everyone, the people who live here now, the generations who came before, and those who will follow." His words struck a chord. For the first time in years, the families looked at each other not as enemies but as neighbors bound by shared history and responsibility. By the end of the day, they agreed to divide the land fairly and work together to restore it to its former glory. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start, and more importantly, it was theirs. Despite these moments of progress, the wanderer often found himself reflecting on his own journey. Who was he really? Was he still the same person who had once lived quietly in a small village, tending fields and telling stories? Or had his experiences transformed him into someone entirely new? These questions haunted him during quiet nights when the only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the soft breathing of the stallion. One such night, as he lay staring at the stars, the horse nudged him gently, as if sensing his unease. "What am I supposed to do next?" he whispered aloud, half expecting no reply. Yet in that moment, clarity washed over him like a wave. He realized that the answers didn't matter as much as the act of moving forward. Every step he took, every person he met, it all added up to something greater than himself. Maybe he would never fully understand why he had returned from the void. But perhaps understanding wasn't the point. Perhaps it was enough to trust the path and keep walking. The next morning they set off again, heading toward a distant mountain range shrouded in mist. Rumors spoke of a hidden monastery where monks meditated on the mysteries of life and death. Something inside the wanderer told him he needed to go there, not for answers, but for perspective. With the stallion leading the way, he climbed higher and higher, the air growing thinner and colder with each passing hour. When they finally reached the summit, the view took his breath away. Rolling hills stretched endlessly in every direction, dotted with tiny villages and winding rivers. It was a reminder of how vast the world was, and how interconnected everything truly was. As he stood there, the wind whipping around him, he felt a profound sense of belonging. This was his home, not just the village he had left behind, but the entire tapestry of life itself. And standing beside him, the stallion seemed to share the moment, its dark coat gleaming in the sunlight. Together, they gazed out at the horizon, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The monastery at the top of the mountain was unlike anything the wanderer had ever seen. Built into the rocky cliffs, it seemed to grow out of the earth itself, its stone walls weathered by centuries of wind and rain. The air carried a sense of stillness, as if time moved differently here. When he and the stallion approached, an elderly monk greeted them with a calm smile, his robes flowing softly in the breeze. Without asking questions or demanding explanations, the monk invited them inside. The interior of the monastery was simple, yet profound. Flickering candles cast warm light on polished wooden floors, and the scent of incense lingered in the air. In one corner, monks sat cross-legged, their eyes closed in meditation, while others tended to small gardens filled with herbs and flowers. It was a place of quiet reflection, where every action felt deliberate and meaningful. For days, the wanderer stayed there, observing the routines of the monks and joining them in their practices. They didn't pressure him to participate, but encouraged him to find his own rhythm. He learned to sit quietly, focusing on his breath and letting go of the thoughts that usually crowded his mind. At first, it was difficult. His mind raced with memories of the void, the whispers, and the faces of the people he had met along his journey. But slowly, he began to feel a sense of peace he hadn't known before. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the head monk invited the wanderer to join him for tea. They sat together in a small room overlooking the valley, the world bathed in shades of gold and purple. For a long time, neither spoke, content to sip their tea and watch the sky change colors. Finally, the monk broke the silence. "You've traveled far," he said, his voice soft but clear. "What have you learned?" The wanderer hesitated, unsure how to put his experiences into words. "I've learned that life is fragile," he began slowly. "That we're all connected even when we don't realize it, and that sometimes the hardest thing isn't finding answers. It's learning to live with questions." The monk nodded thoughtfully, his gaze steady. "And what will you do now?" The question hung in the air, heavy with possibility. The wanderer looked out at the valley below, thinking about the villages he had visited, the people he had helped, and the lessons he had absorbed. Then he glanced at the stallion, who stood nearby, watching him with intelligent eyes. A smile spread across his face. "I'll keep walking," he said firmly. "There are still places I haven't been, stories I haven't heard, lives I can touch. This journey, it's not just mine anymore. It belongs to everyone I meet." The monk smiled faintly, as if he had expected nothing less. "Then may your path be blessed," he said simply. "And remember this, wherever you go, carry the light within you, share it freely, for the world always needs more kindness." The next morning, the wanderer prepared to leave. The monks gathered to bid him farewell, bowing deeply as he passed. The stallion trotted beside him, its hooves clicking against the stone pathway. As they descended the mountain, the wanderer felt lighter than ever before, not because he had found all the answers, but because he no longer needed them. He understood now that life wasn't about certainty. It was about connection, compassion, and courage. Their travels took them to countless new places, each one offering fresh challenges and opportunities. In some towns, they were welcomed with open arms, while in others, they faced suspicion and doubt. But the wanderer didn't let fear hold him back. Whether he was comforting a grieving widow, mediating a dispute between neighbors, or simply listening to someone's story, he gave everything he had without expecting anything in return. Years passed, and the legend of the wanderer grew. People spoke of him in hushed tones, describing him as a man who walked between worlds, carrying hope wherever he went. Some claimed he could heal wounds with a single touch. Others believed he was guided by divine forces. The truth, however, was simpler. He was human, flawed and imperfect, yet driven by a deep desire to make a difference. Eventually, the wanderer grew older, his hair streaked with gray and his steps slower than before. The stallion, too, showed signs of age, its once glossy coat dulled by time, yet neither of them stopped moving. Even when the road became steep and the nights colder, they pressed on, knowing that every step mattered. One day, as they rested, beneath a sprawling oak tree, the wanderer leaned back against the trunk, closing his eyes. The stallion lay beside him, its head resting gently on its forelegs. For a moment, everything was peaceful. The rustling leaves, the distant song of birds, the warmth of the sun filtering through the branches. When the villagers found him later, they saw that he had passed away quietly, a faint smile on his lips. The stallion stood guard over him, refusing to leave his side until the very end. Though sadness filled their hearts, the villagers also felt gratitude for the man who had reminded them of the beauty of life, even in its most challenging moments. They buried him beneath the oak tree, marking the spot with a simple stone etched with a single word: Wanderer. Over time, the grave became a place of pilgrimage where people came to reflect, pray, and seek guidance. And though the man himself was gone, his legacy lived on, in the stories told around campfires, in the acts of kindness inspired by his example, and in the belief that even in the darkest times, there is always light to be found. As for the stallion, it disappeared soon after, vanishing into the wilderness as mysteriously as it had appeared. Some say it returned to the forest, while others believe it crossed into another realm altogether. Wherever it went, one thing was certain: it had fulfilled its purpose, guiding the wanderer on a journey that touched countless lives. In the end, the tale of the horse that trampled the coffin and the man who came back from the grave became more than just a story. It was a reminder that life and death are intertwined, that love and loss shape us in ways we may never fully understand, and that even in the face of the unknown, there is always a reason to keep moving forward, to keep wandering, trusting and hoping,